The glass tower. Dominic Frost stood at the window of his penthouse office, silhouetted against the Boston skyline. At 36 he was already legendary in architectural circles. His buildings rose like crystal dreams in cities worldwide, earning him fortune, fame, and the nickname, the Ice Architect, not for his signature glass designs, but for the cold precision with which he managed both his projects and the people unfortunate enough to disappoint him. The Meridian project presentation is tomorrow, sir, his assistant Julian reminded, placing a stack of portfolios on his desk. The board wants final approval on the landscape integration. Dominic nodded without turning. And the landscape designer, the one from Delhi, Prisha Nair. She arrived this morning. Her portfolio is impressive: awards for sustainable urban design, innovative water conservation systems, top of her class at I don't need her biography. Dominic cut him off. Just make sure she understands what's at stake. This project will redefine Boston's waterfront. There's no room for error. Julian hesitated. She requested a brief meeting today. Something about adjustments to accommodate the soil analysis. Dominic checked his watch. 7 p.m. Fine. 10 minutes. When Prisha entered his office 30 minutes later, Dominic's irritation at the delay vanished momentarily. She wasn't what he expected. Her deep brown eyes held a quiet confidence, and she carried herself with grace despite her obvious exhaustion from international travel. Mr. Frost, thank you for seeing me. Her accent wrapped around his name like silk. I apologize for the delay. The taxi driver got lost. Time is money. Ms. Nair, in my world, delays cost millions, he replied, gesturing to a chair. If his coldness affected her, she didn't show it. Instead, she opened her tablet and began explaining the changes she proposed to the landscape design for the Meridian Complex, Boston's first carbon-negative luxury development. The soil composition near the harbor, who requires adjustments to your original vision, she explained, showing him detailed analysis. But I've redesigned the terrace gardens too. Maintain your aesthetic while ensuring sustainability. For 40 minutes, beyond his intended 10, Dominic found himself engaged in the most stimulating professional conversation he'd had in months. Prisha didn't merely implement it, she enhanced. Her ideas were brilliant, practical, and perfectly aligned with his architectural philosophy. These amendments work, he admitted finally. Incorporate them for tomorrow's presentation. She smiled, and something unfamiliar stirred in his chest. Thank you, Mr. Frost. Dominic, he corrected, surprising himself. The next morning, the Meridian presentation was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp in the Frost Architecture boardroom. Everything had been meticulously prepared. The city's planning board, major investors, and Dominic's entire executive team would be present. At 8:45, Julian approached Dominic nervously. Sir, there's a problem. Ms. Nair hasn't arrived yet. What? Call her. No answer. Her hotel says she checked out early. Dominic's jaw tightened. Find her now, by 9:10. With no sign of Prisha, Dominic was forced to begin the presentation without the landscape portion, a critical component for the eco-conscious investors. He could feel the project slipping away with each passing minute. At 9:27 the boardroom door opened. Prisha rushed in, hair damp from rain, clutching her portfolio case. I'm so sorry, she began, but Dominic's glacial stare silenced her. Take your seat, he said quietly, danger in his voice. She quickly set up her materials, hands slightly trembling. When her turn came to present, she spoke with passion about living architecture and sustainable integration. The investors leaned forward, captivated until halfway through, when she suddenly swayed, gripping the edge of the table. Ms. Nair, one of the board members, rose in concern. I'm fine, she insisted, but her face had gone ashen. She continued valiantly, but when she advanced to her digital model, the projection showed not the Meridian terraces but jumbled files. Her presentation was corrupted. The room grew tense. Dominic stepped in smoothly, attempting damage control, but he could see the doubt in the investors' eyes. When the meeting concluded, he knew they'd lost momentum on his most important project to date. That as the room emptied, Dominic remained seated, a storm building behind his composed exterior. Prisha stood before him, dignity intact despite her evident distress. Mr. Frost, I can explain. Can you explain professional negligence? A corrupted presentation. Tardiness. His voice was quiet but cutting. You've potentially cost this firm millions in investment. My hotel room was broken into last night. My laptop was damaged. I had to retrieve backups, and he raised his hand, silencing her. I don't need excuses. We're done here. Prisha's face registered the blow, but she straightened her shoulders. I understand. As she gathered her materials with trembling hands, Dominic turned away, missing the way she pressed her palm briefly against her abdomen, missing the police report peeking from her bag documenting the break-in, missing everything that mattered in his cold pursuit of perfection. Asterisk seeds of misunderstanding. The rain fell mercilessly as Prisha stepped onto the slick sidewalk outside Frost Architecture's gleaming headquarters. She clutched her portfolio case against her chest like a shield, her other hand instinctively resting on her stomach, a gesture of protection she wasn't even conscious of making yet. 3 blocks away, she finally found shelter under a cafe awning and allowed herself to breathe. You've been through worse, she whispered to herself, blinking back tears that threatened to undermine her resolve. At 29, Prisha had already rebuilt her life once, leaving behind a prestigious position in Delhi after her father's death to care for her ailing grandmother in London. When the opportunity with Frost Architecture came, it had seemed like fate her chance to create something lasting, to merge her passion for sustainable design with cutting-edge architecture. Now that dream lay shattered at her feet, along with the remnants of another secret she'd planned to share with Dominic after the project. Her phone buzzed with a message from her doctor confirming her appointment that afternoon. 6 weeks pregnant. The timing couldn't have been worse, or perhaps, considering today's events, better. At least now she wouldn't have to navigate pregnancy while working under Dominic's exacting standards. The famous ice architect, she murmured bitterly, remembering the night 6 weeks ago, when he'd been anything but cold. That had been the evening after she'd accepted the Meridian project. They'd stayed late at his office, discussing vision and possibility over takeout and wine. One conversation had led to another, professional admiration turning to personal connection, and then in a moment that seemed both inevitable and impossible they'd fallen into each other's arms. By morning, his walls had returned, the night dismissed as a momentary lapse in judgment that wouldn't be repeated. Prisha had agreed, hiding her hurt behind professionalism. Now she wondered if he'd planned to dismiss her all along, just waiting for the first mistake. Inside Frost Architecture's executive suite, Dominic stared at the Meridian model, his reflection fractured across its miniature glass surfaces. The investors want 2 weeks to reconsider, Julian reported, keeping a safe distance from his boss's notorious post-failure mood. But honestly, sir, I think we can salvage this. Ms. Nair's concepts were impressive, even if the presentation was find someone else. Dominic interrupted. Someone reliable. Julian hesitated. There was a police report, sir, in her bag. I noticed it when she was gathering her things. A convenient prop. The hotel confirmed it. Someone broke into her room last night. Her laptop was damaged, along with some personal items. Dominic's hand stilled over the model. Why wasn't I informed? You instructed me never to make excuses for consultants. Julian reminded him carefully. Something uncomfortable shifted in Dominic's chest. He dismissed it as indigestion. It doesn't change anything. She should have had backups, contingencies. That's what I pay for excellence regardless of circumstance. Of course, sir. Julian retreated, leaving Dominic alone with the hollow victory of his principles. Across town, Prisha sat in stunned silence as her doctor explained the ultrasound results. Twins, the doctor repeated gently, identical, from what we can see. Very early, of course, but developing beautifully. Twins, the word echoed in her mind like a bell. Not one life depending on her now, but two. Prisha thought of her own twin sister, lost to childhood illness, and something fierce and protective awakened inside her. What next? She asked, suddenly clear-headed. The next week passed in a blur of practical decisions. Prisha cancelled her return flight to London, secured a short-term apartment rental, and reached out to contacts in Boston's architectural community. Her reputation preceded her. Within days, she had 3 interviews scheduled with firms that valued sustainable design. Meanwhile, at Frost Architecture, Dominic was discovering that replacing Prisha wasn't as simple as he'd assumed. 3 potential landscape architects had reviewed the Meridian project. All suggested changes that felt wrong, soulless compared to Prisha's intuitive understanding of how people and nature interacted with built environments. Seeds of misunderstanding. The rain fell mercilessly as Prisha stepped onto the slick sidewalk outside Frost Architecture's gleaming headquarters. She clutched her portfolio case against her chest like a shield, her other hand instinctively resting on her stomach, a gesture of protection she wasn't even conscious of making yet. 3 blocks away, she finally found shelter under a cafe awning and allowed herself to breathe. You've been through worse, she whispered to herself, blinking back tears that threatened to undermine her resolve. At 29, Prisha had already rebuilt her life once, leaving behind a prestigious position in Delhi after her father's death to care for her ailing grandmother in London. When the opportunity with Frost Architecture came, it had seemed like fate her chance to create something lasting, to merge her passion for sustainable design with cutting-edge architecture. Now, that dream lay shattered at her feet, along with the remnants of another secret she'd planned to share with Dominic after the project. Her phone buzzed with a message from her doctor confirming her appointment that afternoon. 6 weeks pregnant. The timing couldn't have been worse, or perhaps, considering today's events, better. At least now she wouldn't have to navigate pregnancy while working under Dominic's exacting standards. The famous ice architect, she murmured bitterly, remembering the night 6 weeks ago when he'd been anything but cold. It had been the evening after she'd accepted the Meridian project. They'd stayed late at his office, discussing vision and possibility over takeout and wine. One conversation had led to another, professional admiration turning to personal connection. And then in a moment that seemed both inevitable and impossible, they'd fallen into each other's arms. By morning, his walls had returned, the night dismissed as a momentary lapse in judgment that wouldn't be repeated. Prisha had agreed, hiding her hurt behind professionalism. Now she wondered if he'd planned to dismiss her all along, just waiting for the first mistake. Inside Frost Architecture's executive suite, Dominic stared at the Meridian model. His reflection fractured across its miniature glass surfaces. The investors want 2 weeks to reconsider, Julian reported, keeping a safe distance from his boss's notorious post-failure mood. But honestly, sir, I think we can salvage this. Ms. Nair's concepts were impressive. Even if the presentation was find someone else, Dominic interrupted. Someone reliable. Julian hesitated. There was a police report, sir, in her bag. I noticed it when she was gathering her things. A convenient prop. The hotel confirmed it. Someone broke into her room last night. Her laptop was damaged, along with some personal items. Dominic's hand stilled over the model. Why wasn't I informed? You instructed me never to make excuses for consultants. Julian reminded him carefully. Something uncomfortable shifted in Dominic's chest. He dismissed it as indigestion. It doesn't change anything. She should have had backups. Contingencies. That's what I pay for excellence regardless of circumstance. Of course, sir. Julian retreated, leaving Dominic alone with the hollow victory of his principles. Across town, Prisha sat in stunned silence as her doctor explained the ultrasound results. Twins, the doctor repeated gently. Identical, from what we can see. Very early, of course, but developing beautifully. Twins, the word echoed in her mind like a bell. Not one life depending on her now, but two. Prisha thought of her own twin sister, lost to childhood illness, and something fierce and protective awakened inside her. What next? She asked, suddenly clear-headed. The next week passed in a blur of practical decisions. Prisha cancelled her return flight to London, secured a short-term apartment rental, and reached out to contacts in Boston's architectural community. Her reputation preceded her. Within days, she had 3 interviews scheduled with firms that valued sustainable design. Meanwhile, Frost Architecture, Dominic was discovering that replacing Prisha wasn't as simple as he'd assumed. 3 potential landscape architects had reviewed the Meridian project. All suggested changes that felt wrong, soulless compared to Prisha's intuitive understanding of how people and nature interacted with built environments. Perhaps we should reconsider Ms. Nair, Julian suggested cautiously. 2 weeks after her dismissal, Dominic glared at him. She's probably halfway back to India by now. Actually, sir, she's in Boston. She interviewed at Hammond and Brooks yesterday. Dominic's pencil snapped between his fingers. Hammond and Brooks's most significant competitor. You've been tracking her. Julian adjusted his glasses nervously. I thought it prudent to monitor the situation, given the personal nature of your prior relationship. Ice spread through Dominic's veins. What exactly do you mean by that? Only that you seemed to have a strong professional rapport, Julian clarified quickly. And there's something else you should know. The investors were impressed with her concepts enough that they've requested a meeting with her directly. That night, Dominic found himself parked outside the address Julian had reluctantly provided, a modest apartment building in Cambridge. He wasn't entirely sure why he'd come. To offer her job back. To ensure she wouldn't share Frost Architecture's designs with competitors. To apologize. The last possibility was so foreign he almost laughed at himself. He was about to drive away when he saw her emerging from a pharmacy. A small white bag clutched in her hand. Even from a distance he could see the weariness in her posture, so at odds with the vibrant woman who had captivated his boardroom. With visions of hanging gardens and sustainable water systems, something compelled him to step out of his car. Pritla. She turned, her eyes widening in recognition and then narrowing with wariness. Mr. Frost. Following me now. The investors want to meet with you, he said, ignoring her accusation. Hammond and Brooks doesn't have the resources to realize your vision for Meridian. I do. A tired smile touched her lips. Always business first. That's why you're successful, I suppose. I'm offering you your job back, he clarified, irritated by her calm dismissal. No, you're offering me a project, she corrected. There's a difference, and I've already accepted a position elsewhere. Hammond can't match my offer. Not with Hammond. She tightened her coat against the evening chill. Sycamore Design Studio. Small, firm, big principles. They actually asked about the break-in before making assumptions about my competence. The barb struck home. Dominic stiffened. I had a company to protect, and I have something to protect too. Her hand drifted briefly to her stomach, so quickly he almost missed it. Almost. Dominic's eyes followed the gesture, his architect's attention to detail suddenly a curse rather than a gift. The pharmacy bag, the subtle protective stance, the cancelled flight home. You're pregnant, he stated, pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. Prisha's face gave nothing away. Goodbye, Mr. Frost, I wish you luck with Meridian. As she walked away, Dominic remained rooted to the sidewalk, the implications of her silence more damning than any confirmation. Behind him, a passing bus splashed through a puddle, soaking his imported shoes, a fitting metaphor, he thought bitterly, for how thoroughly he had misunderstood everything that mattered. Roots that grow apart for years could transform a city's skyline, and Boston was no exception. The Meridian complex now dominated the harbor view, a crystalline monument to sustainable luxury, its cascading terraces alive with carefully curated greenery. Despite the project's eventual success, the final design lacked the organic soul of Prisha's original vision. Critics noted this in architectural reviews. Beautiful but somehow cold. Like its creator. Dominic stood in his expanded office, now occupying the entire top floor of Frost Architecture's headquarters. Awards lined the walls. Industry accolades confirmed his genius, and his company had tripled in size since Meridian's completion. By every measurable standard, he had succeeded beyond expectation. Why then did emptiness follow him like a shadow? The Singapore investors are waiting in conference room A, his new assistant reminded him. Julian had been promoted to project manager last year, another casualty of Dominic's restlessness. No one stayed close for long anymore. 5 minutes, Dominic replied, turning back to the windows. Below, autumn painted the city in amber and crimson. Somewhere out there, beyond his glass kingdom, was a child. His child. The thought that had haunted him since that night outside Prisha's apartment building. He had attempted to contact her in the weeks following their sidewalk encounter, but she had vanished from Boston's architectural scene entirely. Sycamore Design Studio reported she had declined their offer for personal reasons. Her London contacts claimed no knowledge of her whereabouts. It was as if Prisha Nair had slipped between the cracks of the world, taking with her the only thing Dominic had never designed: a legacy beyond buildings. In a modest neighborhood across the river in Somerville, that legacy was currently refusing to eat his breakfast. "Adi, sweetie, just 3 more bites," Prisha encouraged her son, who was far more interested in the toy truck making elaborate journeys between his plate and the edge of the table. "No, Mama, trucks don't eat oatmeal," 4-year-old Aditya explained with the impeccable logic of childhood. His dark curls fell across a forehead that was the mirror image of his father's, though Prisha was the only one who would recognize the resemblance. "Well, little boys need oatmeal to grow big and strong," she countered, checking her watch. The kindergarten drop-off was at 8, and her first client consultation at 9. Another busy day in the life she had carefully constructed from the wreckage of her Boston dreams. After leaving the city 4 years ago, Prisha had retreated to her grandmother's home in London just long enough to recalibrate her plans. With twins expected, she had needed stability and support, which came in the form of an unexpected opportunity. Her former professor from Delhi had relocated to Providence, Rhode Island, establishing a small sustainable design consultancy. When she contacted him about remote work possibilities, he offered her partnership instead. Life had other plans. In her 5th month, complications arose. Despite the best medical care, Prisha lost one of the twins, a devastating blow that left her hospitalized for weeks, fighting to keep the remaining baby safe. Aditya was born small but fierce, a fighter from his first breath. Once recovered, Prisha settled in Somerville, close enough to the Providence firm to commute twice weekly while building her own client base of local homeowners seeking sustainable landscape solutions. It was smaller scale than her previous ambitions, but it allowed her to be present for Adi while maintaining her professional identity. "Finish your breakfast, Munchkin. We're visiting the butterfly garden today, remember," she reminded him, successfully redirecting his attention. "Will they have the blue ones?" Adi's eyes so like his father's in shape, if not color, widened with anticipation. "Blue more for butterflies." "Yes, and you can draw them in your nature journal." 10 minutes later, they were out the door, Adi chattering excitedly about metamorphosis, a concept his preschool had recently introduced. His vocabulary and grasp of complex ideas frequently surprised even his mother. "Caterpillars transform, Mama," he explained seriously as she buckled him into his car seat. "It's scientific," Priscilla smiled. "That's right. And what do they become? Something beautiful." He nodded with authority. "With wings." As she navigated morning traffic, Prisha considered how transformation had shaped her own life. The pain of losing one child had nearly broken her, but raising Adi had healed parts of herself she hadn't realized were wounded. Motherhood hadn't diminished her professional abilities. It had focused them, made her more efficient, more determined to create sustainable beauty in the world. Her son would inherit. The only shadow was the absence in Adi's life that she couldn't fill. Sometimes he asked about his father, innocent questions. She answered with simple truths. He was an architect who built beautiful things. He lived far away. He didn't know about ADI. This last part wasn't entirely accurate. Dominic knew of the pregnancy, but Prisha had made a conscious choice not to pursue him after their sidewalk encounter. His reaction, clinical assessment rather than human connection, had confirmed what she already suspected. Dominic Frost built magnificent structures but lacked the emotional architecture to nurture a child. Across the river, Dominic moved through his day with mechanical precision. The Singapore presentation went well. Another project secured, another building that would bear his name. Afterward, he found himself staring at the Meridian blueprints, specifically the landscape plans that had been implemented after Prisha's departure. "You're obsessing again," remarked Elise Harrington, his head of operations and the closest thing he had to a friend, a formidable woman in her 50s. She was the only person who spoke to him without fear or agenda. "It's not right," he muttered, tracing the terrace design. "Never has been." Elise studied him, then made a decision. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." 30 minutes later, They stood in the Boston University School of Design gallery, surrounded by student exhibits. Elise led him to a display of urban garden innovations. There, she pointed to a name on a consultation credit, Maid Design, Somerville. Dominic's pulse quickened. She's here, in Somerville, has been for years. Apparently, small practice, specialized clientele. This student consulted with her on pollinator-friendly urban garden designs. For the first time in months, Dominic felt something crack through his professional veneer. Why show me this now? Elise's expression softened slightly. Because you've built an empire but stopped living in it. Dominic, whatever happened between you two, and I suspect it was more significant than a botched presentation, it's time to address it. That evening, instead of returning to his Beacon Hill penthouse, Dominic found himself driving to Somerville. With minimal effort, he located Maid Design at converted Victorian house with a demonstration garden visible from the street, riotous with late-blooming asters and ornamental grasses dancing in the autumn light. He parked across the street, uncertain of his next move. What right did he have to disrupt her life? What words could possibly bridge 4 years of silence? As twilight deepened, a small figure appeared on the porch, a boy in dinosaur pajamas, jumping exuberantly while a woman's voice called from inside, "Audie, brush your teeth, please." The child turned toward the street, and even in the gathering darkness, Dominic could see his own features reflected back at him, the determined jaw, the analytical gaze. The boy noticed him watching and waved enthusiastically, with the uncomplicated friendliness of childhood. Before Dominic could respond, Prisha appeared in the doorway, gently guiding her son inside. She didn't look toward the street, didn't see the man sitting paralyzed in his luxury car, didn't witness the moment when Dominic Frost, creator of soaring towers and sweeping complexes, finally understood how thoroughly he had failed at building the one thing that mattered. Family *, the bridge of recognition. Boston Children's Museum bustled with weekend activity, an organized chaos of young voices and parental supervision. Dominic navigated this unfamiliar terrain with the same precision he applied to construction sites, though with considerably less confidence. He had spent 3 days processing his Somerville discovery, before crafting a plan that even Elise had reluctantly approved, donating a significant sum to fund the museum's new sustainable architecture exhibit. It wasn't coincidence that Maid Design had been contracted for the exhibit's living wall installation. "Mr. Frost, we're absolutely thrilled you could join us today," gushed the museum director, leading him through exhibits of bubbles and building blocks. "Your donation has made this entire innovation wing possible." Dominic nodded absently, scanning each space they passed. "When will the landscape consultant arrive?" "Ms. Nair should be here, Anya." "There she is." Dominic's carefully maintained composure faltered as he saw Prisha across the exhibit hall. For years had softened some edges while sharpening others. Her hair was shorter, practical but still framing her face in gentle waves. She wore simple cloth jeans and a deep blue sweater, yet carried herself with unmistakable dignity. She was discussing something with the installation team, pointing to measurements on a tablet. Beside her stood the boy, Ada solemnly handing tools to one of the workers, as though this were his most important responsibility. "Shall I introduce you?" the director asked. "Not necessary," Dominic replied. "I'll make my own introductions." He crossed the room with deliberate steps, rehearsing opening words that suddenly seemed inadequate. Before he could reach them, Addy looked up, recognition lighting his face. "You're the man from our street," the boy exclaimed. "The one who watches our house." Priscilla turned sharply, her expression transforming from confusion to shock as she registered Dominic's presence. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly. "Funding the exhibit," he answered simply. "We should talk, Prisha." "Mama, do you know him?" Addy tugged at her sleeve, curiosity evident. Prisha hesitated, then made a decision that would alter 3 lives irrevocably. "Yes, Addy, this is Mr. Frost. He's an architect who builds very tall buildings like the pointy ones downtown." Addy's eyes widened with new interest. "Exactly like those," Dominic confirmed, kneeling to the boy's level. "What's your name?" "Odisha Nair," the child answered proudly. "I'm 4 and 3. I like buildings too, but I like gardens more because things grow in them." Something tightened in Dominic's chest at the familiar analytical tone wrapped in childish enthusiasm. "That's a good observation. The best buildings have both. That's what Mama says." Addy beamed, then looked thoughtful. "Your eyes are like mine." Prisha stepped forward. "Addy, why don't you help Mr. Chen with the plant trays while I speak with Mr. Frost?" Once the boy was occupied, she turned to Dominic, her voice low. "How did you find us?" "That's not the important question," he countered. "He's mine, isn't he?" Her silence was answer enough. "Were you ever going to tell me?" He struggled to keep accusation from his tone. "I tried, once," she admitted, "the night you fired me. Then again during our sidewalk conversation. Your response made your priorities clear." "I didn't know you suspected," she corrected. "You calculated, analyzed, and dismissed just as you did with my explanation about the presentation. You see patterns, Dominic, but miss the humanity within them." The truth of her words struck him with the force of physical pain. "I'd like to meet him properly. As would the occasional visitor who builds towers." He deserves consistency, not architecture. Before Dominic could respond, Addie returned, proudly carrying a small potted seedling. Mr. Chen says this is for you, Mama. It's a baby oak tree. Priscia's expression softened as she accepted the gift. Thank you, sweetheart. Can I show Mr. Frost my drawing? Addie asked, already pulling a folded paper from his pocket. It's my design for a butterfly house. Priscilla hesitated, then nodded. Dominic accepted the crude drawing, recognizing in the chaotic lines an intuitive sense of space that mirrored his own childhood sketches. This is excellent, Addie, he said honestly. You've created separate spaces for different activities, just like real architects do. The boy beamed with pride, and Dominic felt something fundamental shift within his carefully ordered existence. Perhaps, Priscilla said carefully, watching their interaction, Mr. Frost could join us for lunch in the museum cafe. If he's not too busy. Dominic recognized the olive branch for what it was. I'd like that very much. Over chicken nuggets and apple slices. Dominic discovered more about his son in an hour than he'd learned about most people in years. Addie loved dinosaurs but feared dogs, could count to 100 in English and Hindi, and believed sincerely that caterpillars were magic because they melt inside the cocoon. Watching Priscilla with their son, her patience, her gentle guidance, her obvious joy in his discoveries, Dominic understood with painful clarity what his life of perfect buildings and empty achievements had cost him. As lunch concluded, Addie grew sleepy, curling trustingly against his mother's side. He needs his nap, Priscilla explained, gathering their things. This has been ... unexpected. Can I see him again? Dominic asked, surprising himself with the rawness of his need. Priscilla studied him, searching for something beyond his carefully composed exterior. Why now, Dominic? After 4 years of silence. Because I built my life around perfection without understanding what was truly valuable, he admitted. I'd like the chance to learn. She nodded slowly. Sunday mornings, where you go to Davis Square Farmers Market, then the playground if weather permits. 9 o'clock. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was possibility. Dominic would take it. Foundations rebuilt. Spring came gradually to Boston, just as understanding grew slowly between 3 people learning to become a family. Each Sunday for 6 months, Dominic had appeared at the farmers market, first as an awkward addition to Priscilla and Addie's routine, then gradually as an anticipated presence. Today, the air held warmth that promised summer, and Odie raced ahead toward the playground, his energy boundless after a winter of confinement. Not too far, Priscilla called, walking beside Dominic with the comfortable silence they had developed. He's getting taller, Dominic observed. The growth charts indicate he's above average for his age group. Priscilla smiled. Still analyzing everything. Professional hazard, he admitted. But I'm learning to see beyond measurements. This was true. The man who once evaluated life in terms of efficiency and achievement now found himself treasuring imperfect moments. Audie's lopsided attempts at writing his name. Muddy footprints across pristine car upholstery after rainy playground visits. The sound of unrestrained laughter when he spun his son in dizzying circles. He asked about you this week, Priscilla said quietly. About why you come on Sundays but don't live with us. Dominic tensed. What did you tell him? The truth. That you're his father, that grown-ups sometimes live separately, and that we're figuring things out together. And his response, he asked if you don't live with us because our house doesn't have enough windows. Her lips curved in a smile. Apparently you've mentioned your fondness for natural light. Dominic laughed softly, an observant kid like his father. They reached the playground, finding a bench with a clear view of the climbing structure where Addie was already scaling the highest platform. I've been thinking, Dominic said after a moment. The Riverside Development Project. I'd like your input on the green spaces. Priscilla raised an eyebrow. Professional consultation. Partnership. He met her gaze directly. Full design authority. Equal credit. Your name alongside mine on the project. Why now? Because I've spent 6 months rediscovering what I lost 4 years ago. Not just ARD, but the vision we might have created together professionally and personally. She considered this, watching their son navigate the playground with careful determination. We can't simply resume where we left off, Dominic. Too much has happened. I'm not suggesting that, he clarified. I'm proposing we build something new, with a stronger foundation, one that honors what we've both learned. Priscilla was silent for so long that Dominic feared he had overstepped. Then she turned to him, her expression softened by something that might have been forgiveness. Start with dinner, she suggested. The 3 of us, at our house. Addie would like showing you his room. I'd like that, Dominic replied, feeling an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. Across the playground, Addie waved triumphantly from the top of the climbing wall. They both waved back, united in that moment by shared pride and concern. He takes risks, Dominic observed. Like his father, Priscilla echoed her earlier sentiment. Then, more seriously, I need to know this isn't temporary, Dominic. Audie's heart is at stake. I've built structures meant to last centuries, he said quietly, but they're just glass and steel. This, he gestured toward their son. Then between them, this is what endures. I understand that now. Priscilla nodded, a cautious hope in her eyes. Then we start with dinner, and see what we can build from there. 2 years later, the Riverside Ecological Center opened to international acclaim, the first major project credited equally to Frost and Nair's sustainable design. Critics praised its seamless integration of built and natural environments. The way light and plants seemed to dance through spaces both intimate and grand. At the private opening reception, Dominic stood back from the crowds, watching Prisha explain a living wall feature to fascinated architectural students. Nearby, 6-year-old Adi conducted his own tour for his kindergarten classmates, pointing out features with the serious authority of someone who had witnessed every stage of creation. "He's a natural," observed Elise, appearing at Dominic's side with champagne flutes. "The perfect synthesis of your vision and her heart." "We're still learning from each other," Dominic acknowledged, accepting the champagne. "And the other project?" Elise nodded toward Pris, "The one that doesn't involve building permits." Dominic smiled, a genuine expression that had become less rare these past 2 years. "Foundations are solid. We're taking it one floor at a time." Across the room, Prisa caught his eye and smiled, a private moment in a public space. They had chosen to maintain separate residences while building their professional partnership and co-parenting relationship, a deliberate patience that honored their complicated history. But lately, Adi had been drawing pictures of houses where all three of them lived together, placing these artworks strategically around both their homes. The latest masterpiece featured a structure that was half skyscraper, half garden, a child's intuitive understanding of what his parents might build together. As the evening concluded and guests departed, the three of them remained in the empty ecological center. Adi ran through the spaces, his laughter echoing against glass and greenery, while Dominic and Prisia walked slowly behind. "He wants us to see the moonlight through the central atrium," Prisia explained. "He's been talking about it all week." When they reached the heart of the building, Adi was already there, face upturned to the glass ceiling where moonlight spilled through strategically placed openings, creating patterns across the interior garden. "It's perfect," he declared with a child's absolute certainty. "Now we need one at home." "Which home?" Dominic asked carefully. Adi gave him the look of patient tolerance. "Children reserved for adults who ask obvious questions. Our home, the one we're going to have together." Priscia's hand found Dominic's in the moonlight, a silent question in her touch. He interlaced his fingers with hers, an equally silent answer. Some structures took years to build properly, their foundations requiring time and care to settle. But when completed, they stood against all seasons, sheltering life, nurturing growth, transforming simple existence into something beautiful that endured long after their creators were gone. "Yes," Dominic agreed, looking not at the award-winning architecture around them but at the family within it. "I think that can be arranged."